But first, we wanted to discuss some of the most pervasive propaganda we're seeing. And I just want to warn our viewers and listeners that we're going to be talking about sexual assault. So please take appropriate caution. Ali, you've been looking at a disturbing set of allegations Israel has been making regarding mass sexual assault and rape by Hamas fighters on October 7th. I understand there are some new developments around that could help provide a framework for people to understand what they're being fed by corporate media and the Israeli government. What do we know, and what are you looking at right now?
Yeah, there's some really nasty stuff circulating, and I really want to break it down for people who are watching. First, I mean, let's just remind people we've talked quite a few times over the last few weeks about all the lies and deceptions surrounding what happened on and after October 7th. And from the very start, Israel and its supporters have spread really inflammatory lies. You'll recall the infamous tale of the 40 beheaded babies. That was a horrific lie that President Biden keeps repeating, despite advice from his own staff that there was actually no evidence for it. And in fact, there is no evidence for it. It's a lie. Uh, and indeed, according to Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, uh, only one baby was killed on October 7th. And as you can see here from the journalist Mohammed Shahade, he's pointing to a very recent Haaretz story over the weekend, debunking some of these early, what he calls iconic horror stories from October 7th. So the 40 beheaded babies. There was also a story of a baby burned in an oven, a pregnant woman's stomach opened and her fetus removed, children bound together and burned, and a pregnant hostage giving birth. Many of these atrocity stories people will have heard, and they were circulated not just by media and pro-Israel uh, uh, people on social media, but also by the Israeli government itself. And now Haaretz is admitting that many of them were fake, and it's actually tracing how these fake stories made it into the mainstream. So that's just some context.
Let's talk a little bit more about how these stories are disseminated and what role the media, especially Western media, has been playing in circulating these, propaganda stories.
Yeah, that's really one of the most disturbing aspects of all this, the way media have amplified these horrifying propaganda tales without even asking Israel for a shred of evidence. They just accept everything Israel says. For example, for weeks, they've parroted Israel's claims that 1,400 people were killed on October 7th. That was the number we heard constantly. Then, about 2 weeks or so ago, Israel reduced the number from 1,400 to 1,200 after admitting that hundreds of burned bodies it initially claimed were Israelis burned by Hamas were actually Palestinians incinerated by indiscriminate Israeli fire. And now Israel seems to have reduced the number yet again, down to about 1,000. This is a tweet over the weekend from one of the Israeli government's official accounts, and you can see we've gone there from 1,400 to 1,200, and now to 1,000. And I haven't seen any explanation why that number is dropping. But you still don't see mainstream media in the West really asking any questions, even when there has been revelation after revelation, mostly coming from Israel itself, about how Israel killed many of its own people on October 7th. Uh, and, we've talked about that in previous live streams. And of course, we've covered that very extensively at the Electronic Intifada. But despite all these revelations of lies and false stories, and a truth very different from what Israel says it is, it's happening all over again.
How is this happening again? And And who are the players behind this?
Yeah, well, now the big push is again with this story of the mass rapes. And now, just to be clear, they made these allegations right at the beginning, right on and after October 7th. But there's a renewed push in recent days from Israel and its lobby groups claiming that Hamas fighters carried out systematic mass rapes as part of their strategy on October 7th. And this is a story, this tweet we see up on the screen is Barry Weiss. She is a longtime pro-Israel propagandist. We could do a whole show on her, but I won't go into much more detail about her today. But she is posting a story from the Jewish Chronicle, a British newspaper, quoting a supposed eyewitness I'll come back to later. And you can see there's some really lurid and terrible claims that citing an alleged eyewitness saying, I saw this beautiful woman with 8 or 10 of the fighters beating and raping her. She was screaming, stop it. I'm going to die anyway from what you're doing. Just kill me. And she calls these alleged perpetrators savages. And there are other examples of this. There's a story today in the New York Post, and it draws on pretty much the same sources. By the way, these photos are not of people being raped. They're just inflammatory photos that have been put in there to make you to make you think that there's more to this than is actually there. But nobody is alleging that the woman who appeared in that image there was actually a victim or a survivor of sexual assault. It's just, again, it shows how images and words are put together in these inflammatory ways. So what I want to say, and then, here's just an example of how this is being pushed at the highest level. Gal Gadot, who is this Hollywood actor, not very good from the reviews I've read, but in this role, she's being deployed to complain that there's silence over the alleged sexual-based violence by Hamas. But the key point, and there are many stories like this going back to October 7th, none of them I've actually seen quotes anyone who claims to have been themselves a victim of such an assault. There are always unverified claims from unnamed witnesses, except in the latest claims, which we'll come to later, or their second or third hand stories. And there's a reason for that, and it's because Israeli police say they do not have any victims.
No victims.
Yeah. So here's a story from CNN on November 19th with the sensational headline, Israel investigates sexual violence committed by Hamas as a part of October 7 horror. That's a pretty awful headline. But right down there in the CNN story, we learn that Israeli police admit that there are no identified victims. It says, Police Superintendent Dudi Katz said officers have collected more than 1,000 statements and more than 60,000 video clips related to the attacks that include accounts from people who reported seeing women raped. He added that investigators do not have first-hand testimony, and it is not clear whether any rape victims survived. And when they say there are 1,000 statements and more than 60,000 video clips, they're referring to all of October 7th, not specifically to rapes. But what they're saying here is that, yeah, we don't have anyone who says they were actually assaulted, which is odd given that they claim that this was a mass strategy where it was systematic. And amazingly, not only do they not have any identified victims, but they also have no forensic evidence. And so let's take a look at another story. This is from the Times of Israel, and this was published earlier in November, on November 9th. And actually, I'll say this Times of Israel story is part of a genre. There were I've seen several stories like this. There was one in the Times of Israel, this one, another one in Haaretz, and there have been similar stories in the Washington Post and other newspapers as well, which again start from the premise that there was a huge number of rapes and sexual assaults, but then they're all about explaining why there's no evidence of this. And so this is a good example of that. So um, this particular story in the Times of Israel says, quote, in the wake of the unprecedentedly large mass casualty event, physical evidence of sexual assault was not collected from corpses by Israel's overtaxed morgue facilities amid their ongoing scramble to identify the people killed, many of whose bodies were mutilated and burned. And so this article, like some of the others I've mentioned, is full of these little explanations for why they didn't collect any forensic evidence. Although you will find lots of claims that, this first responder saw a body that looked like they may have been assaulted and so on. But none of these people are experts. And you see here in this Times of Israel quote, they say many of those bodies are mutilated and burned. And you'll recall, of course, that it later emerged that at least 200 of those burned bodies were not Israelis or potential Israeli rape victims, but Palestinians incinerated by the Israeli military. And you'll also see, Nora, sometimes that there are claims, and you see this a lot on social media, that there are videos, or even that Hamas fighters took videos of themselves raping Israeli women. But I have seen nobody has circulated such a video, and I have seen no credible reports of videos of actual rapes. What you get instead of these myriad claims that various, as I mentioned, first responders saw women with blood on them or with injuries that made them think that person could have been sexually assaulted or raped. But none of these people cited in the media accounts are qualified to make such determinations. And none that I've seen have come from actual forensic pathologists talking about specific victims. It's all just hearsay and sensational claims, and often the so-called witnesses are members of the Israeli army, in other words, members of the organization that is perpetrating genocide against Palestinians.
Right. And there really are no videos. I mean, this is, they can say that there are, we've seen all these videos, the 60,000 different videos from that day, but there's somehow not one that
Right.
shows
I've
any
seen
evidence.
no report. I've certainly seen no video of a rape. Thank goodness. That's not
Yeah.
something I
No.
want to see, or any of us should want to see. But I've not even seen really reports now, more than 2 months later, getting up to 2 months after these events, that such a video exists. And so in recent weeks, Nora, you'll know, and we've mentioned this before, that Israel has been showing uh, I think it's a 45 or 47-minute compilation of videos that it claims depicts atrocities committed by Palestinians on October 7th. And it's shown this documentary to various hand-picked
Right.
journalists. One of them is Owen Jones of The Guardian, a nominally left-wing journalist who, as we've reported on the Electronic Intifada, has often been quite willing to pander to Israel and its lobby. And I mention that because, Jones would be someone who I think would want to, if he saw something, would want to emphasize that it incriminated Palestinians. But last week, Jones attended a screening of this video organized by the Israeli military, and then he did his own video talking about it. Here's a clip of what Jones said after watching what we can only presume is the very best evidence Israel can muster for its allegations.
If living people were beheaded, otherwise, we are not shown that in any of the video footage. If there was torture too, there's no evidence given for it on camera. Now, if there was rape and sexual violence committed, we don't see this on the footage either. Now, a warning here for deeply distressing description, but a clip of an Israeli woman inspecting a badly burned woman's corpse to see if she was a relative. She had no underwear. This has been offered as evidence of rape, but that's not what you would consider conclusive evidence. We don't see children being killed. Hamas don't kill those two poor little boys, for example, certainly not on camera. And I imagine we would have been told if they had been killed. Now,
yeah, so you can see there from Owen Jones that that video in which the great minds of the Israeli army and government brought together all the best evidence that they could gather doesn't show pretty much any of the things Israel claimed were out there, and certainly doesn't show evidence of rape. Now, of course, people might argue that something like that is simply too horrific to show. And a lot of what Israel has shown or claims is from October 7th is very horrific. But the videos, if they existed, could have been shown in a way that protected the dignity and the identity of the people involved. Or alternatively, Israel could have shown these videos, again, if they existed, to internationally respected and trusted journalists or investigators. But I've read no accounts that any videos corroborating the claims of rape have been shown to any such trusted viewers. But despite this lack of evidence, over the past couple of days, there has been this renewed push to propel this mass rape story into the headlines with new supposed eyewitness testimonies. But again, I'm seeing no reports of actual identified victims or forensic evidence.
Right. And who can we identify as behind this push? I mean, we had at the very beginning, the 40 beheaded babies, the babies hung from a clothesline, these the stories of evisceration, like horrible, horrible stories that, of course, were debunked. And it was clear that these stories were being fed to the press by certain individuals. What do we know about this story and who's behind it?
Right. Well, it's being pushed from a lot of directions. All those directions originate in Israel and from its lobby. But one particular name you'll see repeatedly associated with this in recent days is a woman called Kochav El-Kayam Levi. She's being presented, and that's a picture of her, she's being presented as a feminist scholar and international human rights expert who is heading an independent civil commission investigating the alleged use of mass rape as an organized tactic by Hamas fighters on October 7th. And her name is everywhere right now. For example, in this big interview that was published by Haaretz on November 30th. And look at that headline. The scope of Hamas's campaign of rape against Israeli women is revealed, testimony after testimony. And the subheading, which I'll read, the aggregation of evidence collected by Dr. Kochav El-Kayam Levi and her civil commission presents a horrifying picture that leaves no room for doubt. On October 7, Hamas terrorists systematically carried out acts of rape and sexual abuse. I want to come back to these claims in a bit, Nora, especially the headline. But first, can I talk about who Kochav Eliakim Levi is?
Please.
So our friends at Mondoweiss published a really important article focusing on the mass rape allegations in recent days. I think it was on December 1st. And they took as a starting point a piece by Jake Tapper, or a broadcast by Jake Tapper on CNN on his show. And I really encourage everyone to read the Mondoweiss piece. And it provides some really crucial information. And I'm just going to share a little bit of that with you. It says, the CNN report begins with an interview with Kochav Elkayam Levy. She is identified as an expert in human rights law who organized a civil committee to document evidence. The speaker is indeed an expert, but not of human rights law. In her former positions, including a post for the Israeli government's Attorney General's office in the International Law Department, she provided the legal justification for Israeli officials committing human rights violations against Palestinians. She had previously published a guidance for policymaking, government officials, and legal advisors in the management of hunger strikes, which provided a detailed legal manual to allow force feeding, a brutal act of torture used to break political prisoners. So, in other words, this so-called human rights expert is writing guidance for the Israeli government on how to do torture. And Mondoweiss observes that that CNN considered it appropriate to bring her on as a human rights expert, and they note that in her interview with CNN, Elkayam Levy presents nothing but justifications for the absence of evidence and facts. So that, again, that's a very similar pattern to these articles I mentioned in the Times of Israel and the Washington Post in Haaretz. And this is really important now. CNN hides the tight connections between Elkayam Halevi and Israel's National Security Council. Elkayam Levy is also the founder and director of the Dvorah Institute, which works as a close advisory body to the Israeli Prime Minister's National Security Council. The advisory committee for the Dvorah Institute includes a former director of the Israeli Prime Minister's office and 3 former officials in the National Security Council. And here's something else I found. Elkayam Levy used to work for the IDF spokesperson's unit. That's in the Haaretz article I showed you a few minutes ago. In other words, she used to do propaganda for the Israeli army. And this all appears to be a typical Israeli propaganda effort run out of or run by close associates of the Israeli Prime Minister's office.
So, an independent girl boss feminism expert, for sure. What is she actually claiming? And in order for her to have proposed or exposed these, these horrifying revelations, she must have been able to dig up new evidence to get so much attention. What's behind this?
Well, you would think so, but let's go back to that Haaretz article again for a minute, the one with the sensational headline claiming that the scope of Hamas's campaign of rape against Israeli women is revealed testimony after testimony. Well, let's take a look at this highlight of the article pointed out by the excellent propaganda busting account Propaganda & Co. Their name is ironic, of course. And they point out that the headline claims that there is testimony after testimony, but the article itself states, thus far the commission, that's the allegedly independent commission headed by Elkayam Levy, thus far the commission has not taken testimony directly. And this is not the only giveaway in this article. Let's go through another example if we can. And this is the type of evidence it allegedly contains. And again, now I'm going to read a bit from the Haaretz article. It says, the Shin Bet Security Service, of course, that's Israel's secret police, notorious for its use of torture, has released recordings of at least 2 investigations of Nukhba terrorists. Nukhba is the elite unit of the Qassam brigades, the Palestinian resistance. So it claims that they've released recordings from Nukhba terrorists who were asked whether they had been given specific orders to abuse women and children. Referring to the sex crimes, one of them said that the aim was to soil them, to rape them. A second terrorist related that, quote, the commander said, you have to step on their heads, cut off their heads, do everything to them. And again, still reading from Haaretz, a military source cited by the daily Yediot Ahronot noted that the terrorists related that the aim of cutting off heads and rape was to sow fear and alarm in the Israeli public. Well, what do you notice about this? First of all, they're citing interrogation videos from an agency whose use of torture is very well documented and acknowledged even in Israel and regulated in Israel. They allow a Shin Bet to use torture. Secondly, these Palestinian fighters allegedly confessed they were given orders to cut off heads, and yet there is not a single beheading or decapitation that has been documented. So how much credibility can you give this? And then the third thing to notice is this is coming from a military source, So the accuser here is the army committing genocide. This is not actual evidence. But this is in the Haaretz article claiming testimony after testimony. So now another key part of the spin in the Haaretz article profiling Kochav Elkayam Levy and her supposedly independent commission is she complains a lot about the fact that independent bodies and even journalists aren't fully buying into this story and are asking for more concrete evidence. For example, even just a rough estimate of the number of victims or whether there's forensic evidence. And so there you see Haaretz asking, have you found yourself becoming a relay station for the horror stories? And she says, this is Elkayam Levy says, no, I do not go there myself. Even with requests for numbers, I don't cooperate. They ask me, how many? There was one journalist here, a woman from a foreign news network, who drove me crazy. Are we talking about tens, hundreds, thousands? I'm sorry, no. It would be irresponsible of me to cite a number. So, like the journalist there, this foreign journalist who, whether they exist or not, we don't know. But if they do, they're asking the right question. Like, are we talking about 1 victim, 10 victims, 100 victims, 1,000? And Elkayam Halevi is talking like it's outrageous to even ask how many victims there are. I mean, what's wrong with that question? You could say, well, we're not 100% sure yet, but we think it's in this rate. They won't even give a single number, nothing. And then Elkayam Levy makes another extraordinary statement. Again, this is the same Haaretz article claiming testimony after testimony. And this is what Elkayam Levy says to explain the fact that no victims have been identified. And I think we can put this quote up on the screen too. Again, this is Elkayam Levy. She says, in the case of, she says, in the case of October 7, we'll never know the extent of the damage. We know that the vast majority of those who were harmed were also murdered. So that's one explanation for why there are no, there were mass rapes, but in this chaotic situation, they managed to kill exactly everyone who was subjected to this awful mass rape campaign. If there are survivors among those who are harmed, decades could go by before they gather the courage to talk about it. So well, there could be living victims, but we might not know that for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So don't ask about that now. And then she says, in the few cases in which someone else witnessed their suffering, I assume that then too questions will arise as to exactly what he saw and whether he is a reliable witness. I don't intend to participate in that game. Well, when you have an eyewitness, the first thing you should ask any responsible person would do, whether they're a journalist or investigator or a court of law, is ask, is this eyewitness credible? And what she's saying here is don't even dare ask those questions. We can say anything, or we can put forward anyone and claim they're an eyewitness, and you can't question them. In other words, Nora, we just have to take their word for everything.
Yeah.
But why would we when Israel lies about so much, as we've already seen?
Right. Are there any other examples that we can talk about?
Yeah, I know we've spent a lot of time on this, but there are others if you think we should go through them.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, yeah, I'll just go through them quickly. So go back to the Mondoweiss article, a really important article I pointed to earlier. In that CNN report by Jake Tapper that they discuss, there's one example that's talked about where they say that the CNN report presents a video of an Israeli soldier showing only his back and identified by the letter G, claiming to be a paramedic of Unit 669, the Israeli Air Force Special Tactics Rescue Unit. And in his testimony, the soldier says that during a search of the houses in Kibbutz Be'eri, he opened a door of a bedroom to find the bodies of two girls aged between 13 and 15, both killed, one of them naked with semen remains on her lower back. I mean, this is I'm sorry for these graphic images. That's what he claimed, and he claimed this was during combat. But as Mondoweiss notes, upon examining the names of all girls killed in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th to match the facts, no pair of Israeli teenagers meeting that description were found dead together. There are other problems with this particular example. That's just one of them. Another being that there's no evidence that this Unit 669 was ever in Be'eri. And there's also a claim from CNN and other media that there's one so-called eyewitness who hasn't been named that Israeli police played a recording of at a press conference in mid-November. And the recording of this eyewitness claimed that she saw with her own eyes a group of Palestinians raping an Israeli woman. And then I think this was the story where they claimed that they then cut off her breast and started tossing it to each other like a ball. Horrifying stuff. But CNN and the other media did not report another thing this alleged eyewitness said in the same recording played by the Israeli police. And I quote from the recording, "I saw one of them carrying a naked girl on his shoulder while the others were raising decapitated heads, like in a kind of demonstration of power." So has anyone else said that they saw Palestinian fighters carrying decapitated heads? Even the Israeli government hasn't said that. But that shows you the credibility of this alleged eyewitness who has been widely cited, and up till recent days, the only alleged eyewitness. And finally, on Kochav El Kayam Halevi, the journalist Max Blumenthal has pointed out that while she is unwilling to share any real information, not even numbers, although she claims to have this vast database of evidence, she's happy to spread disinformation. And here's a video of her presenting an old photo of a deceased Kurdish female fighter, nothing to do with Palestine, and claiming that it is an Israeli woman assaulted at the supernova rave on October 7th. So this is, she was giving a talk, I think, at Harvard, and it's just a short clip we can play.
Another image shows the body of a young woman stripped from the waist down, her underwear torn, hung on one leg, and she was photographed on the site at the Nova Music Festival.
Okay, so now, and then
another image
yeah, that
shows the
it's
body
just
of a young
repeating
woman.
now. We can switch to the next slide, as it were, in which Max Blumenthal documents the pictures that El-Kayam Levy is talking about, that they actually come from a completely different country, and they come from May of 2023, and so neither from the place and time that she's talking about. And a final slide I want to show, or tweet I want to show from Max, points to a very pertinent fact that in the reports that are circulating in the last couple of days, and this includes a report in the UK newspaper, the Sunday Times, and it's been circulated in others, quotes an eyewitness called Yoni Saadon, who allegedly witnessed this horrible rape of a beautiful woman who was saying, kill me, I'm going to die anyway from this thing, by 5 or 6 fighters, so this witness claims. And as Max points out, that prior to December 3rd, there is no reference to this Yoni Saadon or to this testimony. This simply appeared now out of the blue, 2 months after the event, when Israel found its narrative in trouble.
Ali, I mean, there's so many thoughts I have. I mean, on the one hand, these fabrications are so similar, duplicates to claims that people have made against people of color here in the U.S. Especially, I mean, Emmett Till wasn't that long ago. And these false claims of Black men, or now we're, Palestinian men not able to control themselves around white women or Israeli women, is part and parcel of white supremacist ideology. It's meant to incite consent, manufacture consent for whatever comes next, whether it's lynchings or whether it's the genocide of people in Gaza. What's the purpose of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Nora. There is a long history of this in colonial history of painting indigenous people or enslaved people as dangerous, barbaric savages, and particularly the men, who are considered the greatest threat, as sexual predators against the settler women or the white colonial women. And you see that in North America with depictions of Native Americans and enslaved Black men as rapists, and that was often the pretext or excuse for lynching. And it was also very prevalent in apartheid South Africa, where people would, the term that was used was zwarte gevaar, which is a Afrikaans or Dutch phrase meaning black danger, that women were taught that Black men would rape them. And so this gave an excuse not just to further control these populations, but to kill them, as Israel is doing now, or as with all the lynchings we saw in the South. And of course, as I mentioned in my commentary the other day, the Nazis used this kind of propaganda against Jews. And what it does is it reduces the resistance of the population to the extermination or murder or demonization of this population. You demonize them into this great danger. You rile people's anger up, and using such a visceral stuff. We haven't even gone into how lurid some of the claims are that Israel is making about what happened on October 7th. But that serves the purpose of riling people up at home and abroad to support the extermination of Palestinians. And that is really what's going on here. I'll just say in closing, one final twist or innovation of Israel here is not so much to do this in the crude colonial way of the past, but they've put kind of a Me Too spin on it. So now it's all about believe women, believe Israeli women. And if you don't believe these claims, then you're the type of person who doesn't believe women who say they're sexually assaulted. But the problem with that here is there are no women to believe, because as I've said, Israel is not so far. Maybe they'll find one months later or decades later, as El-Kayam Levy says, who claims to have been attacked. But so far, there are no women coming forward and saying, I was a victim of this, believe me. And it's Israel they want us to believe. But why would we believe Israel, which lies 99.999% of the time, as we well know? But I just want people to be aware of the questions to ask when you see these claims, and how to challenge this really violent propaganda which is being used to incite and justify genocide. And that's why I think it was important to spend time dissecting it.
Well, I know we really appreciate that, Ali. I know it's not, an easy topic to have to spend days and days and days on, but it is very important, especially when we're talking about manufacturing consent, and using these kinds of just vile and horrific stories to further demonize and dehumanize Palestinians who are fighting for liberation.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.